Oh shit, it's time for a new From game. Now I'm a massive From fanboy, ever since Demon's Souls. And while I haven't played that game much since its release, I think for me the original Dark Souls is what really got me into it. I could gawk over Dark Souls for hours and everything that makes it great, but for now let's focus on Dark Souls 3. If you haven't played Dark Souls 3 yet, it's definitely one of those games that's best enjoyed completely blind. I would recommend not watching this video if you plan on playing the game, because there are some things that I might spoil for you. The first thing to say, much to everyone's relief, is that the level design in Dark Souls 3 is better than in Dark Souls 2. Areas feel natural in how they connect, and the world layout feels like it makes sense. It has both a diversity in areas, like in Dark Souls 2, while still maintaining an overall cohesion without it all feeling the same, which is a problem I had with Bloodborne. For me, it definitely takes the best of both games, and it very much feels like Dark Souls 1, which is a good thing. There are several parts that are actually very reminiscent of Dark Souls 1. A fire-breathing wyvern guarding a bridge in a town filled with undead, a broken down town filled with odd goblin creatures, a poisoned swamp that slows your movement, and this little spot that gives me some unwanted flashbacks of On Orlando. But the game still stays fresh. Many of the areas have stunning visuals. The first time I entered Firelink Shrine, I was blown away by just how cool it looked, and at the same time this enclosed area filled with NPCs feels safe, which is exactly how a hub area should feel, a peaceful resting spot after clearing through a difficult area. There is no map in the game, but this is made up for by these high perch areas where you can get a good idea of what's below you and what's around you. It makes exploration feel like a much more natural process. And in typical Souls fashion, the game is quite difficult. Each new area I enter not only feels challenging, but also feels like the most challenging area I've been to so far, which only speaks well about the difficulty curve. What I've always admired about difficulty within Souls games is that it's rarely about how much HP an enemy has and how much damage they do. Most enemies hit about as hard as you can, and you can kill each other in 3 or 4 hits. In fact, even very tough enemies have very little HP. What makes them difficult is the way that combat itself works. You need to be aware of the enemy moveset and strike when you have an opportunity and evade when you don't. It's always satisfying to defeat a tough enemy with 1 or 2 well-timed critical attacks. Now the game isn't without its problems. If you're familiar with the Souls series, Dark Souls 3 has the same sort of issues that most Souls games do. Many times the camera is just as difficult an enemy as the actual monsters. You'll fight and struggle with it constantly in closed areas or around large creatures. It doesn't help that many enemies, and especially bosses, are extremely large, and there's just no good way to keep an eye on attacks from giant limbs that rise far above you. Another issue that I have is that weapons seem to be balanced for in-game. Early game, not all weapons are created equally. In a very early area, I found this Deep Axe, and though it's upgraded now, even its starting damage was around 220 because of the dark damage modifier. Not only does it blow away every early weapon in terms of damage, but it's also extremely fast too. It wasn't until far later in the game that I started finding weapons that scaled with stats well enough to outclass the Deep Axe. It bothers me because I'd really like to try out new weapons, but unless I have significant stats and a nearly fully upgraded weapon, I'm severely gimping myself by using anything other than this one axe. Another potential issue I have is with the weapon infusion system. I think it's really cool that you can enchant your weapon in all these different ways, but I really wonder how many of these enchantments are actually useful. I hope that it doesn't come down to the same issue that Bloodborne had, in that there are many different gems you can use, but only 1 or 2 of them are ever worth using. Right now the multiplayer features are a little buggy. I find myself unable to summon my friends half the time, and when I get invaded, the invader usually seems to be a bit laggy. Hopefully it's an issue that will be fixed in time. Overall, the game is very good, and 20 hours into it, I'm still enjoying myself quite a bit. If you're a fan of dark fantasy and relentless difficulty, I definitely recommend picking up Dark Souls 3. I'll likely be making more videos about it in the future, and because this is the kind of game I can really see myself getting into, probably some guides and how-tos as well. Anyway, I'm Cothrix, and you have a wonderful day.